Also, viewers who may be watching on our proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the public session of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children and Youth Affairs. The purpose of today's meeting is to have an engagement with Mr Pat Rabbitte following his nomination by the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, Dr Kathleen Funchion TD, as Chairperson of Designated of TUSLA, which with effect from 1st of January 2019. This is an opportunity for the Joint Committee to discuss with Mr Rabbitte his vision and his strategic priorities for his term of office. I welcome Mr Rabbitte to the meeting and thank you for appearing before the committee today. Before we commence, in accordance with procedure, I am required to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act of 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of the proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name, or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against people outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I remind members and witnesses to turn off their mobile phones or to switch them to flight mode as they interfere with the sound system and make it difficult for parliamentary reporters to report the meeting. Television coverage and web streaming may also be adversely affected. I also wish to advise Mr Rabbitte that any submission or opening statement you have made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. After your presentation, there will be questions from members of the committee. I now call on Mr Rabbitte to make your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank the committee for the invitation to appear before you this morning. As the committee will know, I have spent most of my working life in public service of one kind or another, and I approach the challenge of Chairperson of TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, from that perspective. The agency is tasked with improving the service for vulnerable children and families throughout the country. Although it's a young agency, very considerable progress has been made since its establishment in 2014. It is my observation that in the intervening period, there has been little enough attention given to the very positive narrative that TUSLA has to tell. Perhaps that's in the nature of the very demanding and sensitive work that goes on in child protection day in, day out. Of course, deficiencies in the agency have also been highlighted in recent years, and it is undeniable that challenges continue to exist. It's also undeniable that there is a transformation underway in the priority that public policy now attaches to caring for vulnerable children and in supporting families who need assistance as compared to even more recent history. As regards the quality of service and consistency of practice, it is unavoidable that there are legacy issues and cultural changes that must be confronted. Resources are finite, and recruitment of professional staff, in particular the recruitment of social workers, is very challenging. Additional resources over the past couple of years are very welcome, but there will never be sufficient resources to meet all of the challenges. In respect of the core business, the shortage of social workers leaves the agency vulnerable to criticism when non-compliance with best practice is sometimes established. The statute from which TUSLA derives its existence, the Child and Family Agency Act of 2013, is uniquely prescriptive. As a result, there are hugely onerous responsibilities on the board and on the chief executive and the executive management. Perhaps this is a positive pressure to continue to raise our standards on the protection of children as compared to the past. However, it does mean that there is an inordinate demand on executive time to dwell on compliance and bureaucratic matters. TUSLA has come through a difficult time over the past 18 months or so. In my view, the agency is the stronger for it, provided that we can show that we have learned the lessons. The challenge of caring for vulnerable children and families will never attain perfection. However, an enormous amount of thought and work has gone into bedding down the new agency and in evolving best practice. I hope that I will be able to help drive that ongoing progress and motivate the undoubted capacity within TUSLA to further improve and develop our child and family protection services. I'm satisfied that we have the people with the necessary skills and dedication to provide our vulnerable children with a world-class service. TUSLA needs to be more transparent, and there's no reason why the agency should fear greater openness, which is not to say that, on occasion, there are very particular reasons for restraint. Sometimes there are competing rights, and reasonable judgment must apply. I think we may be mistaken if we presume that we can change the inherited culture of an organisation by excessive micromanagement or by multiplying the mechanisms for oversight. There are a number of immediate priorities, Chairperson, that I would like to progress, and I will be glad to try and answer any questions that you and your colleagues have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rabbitte, for your opening statements. I'll now open to members for questions. Deputy Sherlock, do you wish to start?
Thank you, Chairman. I find myself in a very strange position this morning because we're addressing an issue in respect of, your chairing of TUSLA, Pat, and as a former colleague, it feels very strange to be at this side of the table when you're at that side of the table. But I do want to acknowledge your stellar public service, and as you've said yourself, you've spent most of your life in public service, and I believe on a personal level that you are going to bring a perspective as reflecting that public service into this role as chairperson of TUSLA. So I think that you are going to have a very strong understanding of the dynamics that drive the type of work that we do, as public representatives, and the challenges that we face in representing constituents whose families interface with organisations like the HSE and TUSLA, and you'll have a very intimate knowledge of that. And I think because you have that perspective, I think that will very much drive the type of culture that you talk about. And I welcome your opening statement, because I do sense from the opening statement that there is a need for TUSLA to be very open in terms of how it operates, and also in recognising the challenges that TUSLA as an organisation faces. I just want to wish you well in that role, and I think today perhaps is just a starting point in deepening the relationship between TUSLA as an organisation and this Oireachtas committee, because just recently, and you've made reference to the challenges that you face, and particularly in respect of the shortage of social workers, because that has a massive bearing in terms of the interaction between the family unit, if you will, and the state in terms of the societal issues that are there on the ground. I think if we can delve a bit deeper into the issue of recruitment, because we had a very positive interaction here with TUSLA recently in respect of the challenges that they face and the interactions that they're having, with academia, and trying to compete for social workers in a very competitive space where, arguably the recruitment issue, you're competing now on a global level for talent, if you will. And I'm just wondering if there needs to be a stronger political input at government level on a cross-departmental basis, as between maybe education and children and youth affairs, in respect of maybe ownership of this as a policy issue, if you will. And I wouldn't mind hearing your perspective on that. And I recognise and I'm conscious that you can't stray into the political space too much, as it were. But we do know that there's a shortage of social workers. We do know what the consequence of that shortage is. We do know that people are doing their best within the organisation to manage their caseloads. We know that the caseloads are increasing exponentially. We know that there's a rate of attrition of social workers. And I think if we can crack that nut collectively, as between the Oireachtas, the Minister and TUSLA itself, I think we'll be doing a good day's work in respect of the operations of TUSLA. So my only intervention today really is to see if we can get a greater perspective, even at this early stage, in respect of maybe what the Oireachtas needs to do or maybe focus on in respect of the recruitment issues, or what government could be doing in respect of facing those challenges.
Thank you. Mr. Rabbitte.
Well, Chairman, firstly, thank you to Deputy Sherlock for his kind remarks and good wishes. I think he's right about the relationship between the agency and politics and the political environment generally. I think a great deal more can be done there. Outside of this committee, I greatly doubt if members of the Oireachtas are as familiar with the work of TUSLA as one might expect, given that as constituency politicians they encounter these issues from time to time. And I think, you know, the responsibility for that rests with TUSLA in terms of promoting the good narrative that it has to tell, as well as the deficiencies that have been highlighted in various inquiries and so on. There is a good story to tell, and I certainly would welcome forging that closer link that Deputy Sherlock talks about with politics. And, you know, Chairperson, I'm very happy to invite you and your colleagues to Brunel House to meet with us for a tailored presentation, tailored to meet your needs and suggestions that would come from members of the committee. I think that might be helpful to both of us. On the big issue of recruitment that Deputy Sherlock raises, I'm aware that you've had the opportunity recently to discuss this one with the Chief Executive and members of the senior management team. And there's no doubt about it, but that it is a big issue for the agency, and it's also a large part of the explanation for some of the deficiencies highlighted, for example, in the HICWA report. Notwithstanding recruiting 800 social workers since 2014, we have had to run very fast to stand still. The net gain is minimal, 4%. In fact, last year last year was a good example. I think we recruited something like 60% of the available social workers, which was something like 142 or something, but 158 left the service, whether through retirement or people leaving the service. And that gives you an idea of 142 social workers recruited in 2018, 158 left through retirement and other reasons. So it's a huge issue for us, Chairperson, and we really do have to look at whether training, education of social workers should only be the remit of the traditional universities. I think we have to go outside of the traditional universities. And I think we also have to look at what are the possibilities for other grades to convert to becoming social workers. I mean, why oughtn't there be a conversion course, for example, for social care workers? And on the particular point raised by Deputy Sherlock, this issue can't be resolved by TUSLA alone. I mean, I'd love to get into the car with the Chief Executive and go up and see the new President of Technological University Dublin, and indeed the heads of the Institutes of Technology. Colleges that have been so successful in producing skilled people for industry and business. And I'm quite sure they would be responsive. But that's not the way things happen in the public service, and there's a high-level committee dealing with this, but insofar as I can see, there's no provision by any of the universities to increase the output. I think it was 215, there are 215 places per annum, and there are no, there are no proposals that I can see by the universities to tackle it next year. In the meantime, there's huge pressure on the agencies. You know, I know of one area that I was dealing with recently where 33 social workers left last year. We have 92 social workers on maternity leave at the moment. That can't happen without leaving gaps. And it really is a huge issue for us, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think.
Okay. Deputy Rabbitte, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chair, also for coming before us this morning. And I'm going to continue on the same theme, and I suppose I'm a little bit unique as well, in like what Deputy Sherlock is after saying. You and I share the same name, and it's a very unusual name and everything else like that. But I hope to continue that tradition of keeping a rabbit here in Leinster House for a little while. In relation to the theme which Deputy Sherlock put on us, like myself as an East Galway TD, maybe in the past it wouldn't have been a regular issue where people would have come to you or talked to you about issues regarding their engagement with TUSLA. But can I assure you, in the last 3 years, a week doesn't go by that a case doesn't come before me or a representation comes for me to engage in. And I think this is where relationships need to improve and openness needs to get a little bit better. Because, see, if I have an issue regarding planning or anything else, I can deal with the County Council. And there is no issue there. My Chief Executive or any of the planners in there, I can have conversations. If I have any issue in relation to the ETPs, I have a direct line that I can talk to people. That is not the experience with TUSLA. That is not the experience with TUSLA nationally, regionally or locally. And it's not the first time, Chair, that I have said that here in this room. That I feel sometimes it's a lockdown situation. Yes, you have used it yourself. Sometimes it's a need-to-know basis. But somewhere there has to be dialogue, there has to be communications, there has to be an understanding. As front bench spokesperson for my party, I feel I should have that relationship with TUSLA. I feel there should be that openness, and it isn't there. Now, that is not for my part for the want to try. And when people come before me, I fail to make progress in every single one of my cases. That should not be the case. And yet when I do engage at a local, regional level with it, I'm put on a recording where there's an open conversation where the call is recorded and there's 3 people sitting in on it. That to me is not how you do business. And it sours a taste. And at the end of the day, in all of these cases, it's children we're talking for. It's for the welfare of the child, where they're looking for, families are looking for help, where they're feeling they can't make it. So I really welcome what you've said here this morning about bringing us forward and showing us more of an openness. And I think if I was to ask you one thing as Chair going forward, that is something that needs to actually happen. And I talk about local government and I talk about the Department of Education. Why can't we have that same level of support, of two-way mechanism of communication from the Children's Oireachtas Committee and TUSLA? And you, your good self, Chair, we have raised this numerous times here. So I'll just leave it at that, and I will take you at face value that you are going to progress that, as what you have said there to Deputy Sherlock, because I don't like the mannerism in which it operates at this moment in time. The lack of response to phone calls, emails, and how when you make a call, you feel that is an unwelcome call. Moving on in relation where you say you'd love to get into the car and drive down to meet with the ITs and everything else, I'm wondering, is there another way we could look at this, Chair? Is there a way that we can facilitate work experience? Like, we have to give these young people that are in the ITs the opportunity to do the work experience. At the moment, there isn't that opportunity. Surely there has to be a mentoring programme. In secondary school, we do, the TY course where there's mentoring and it's that. But when you go to third level, surely at the moment, I have a particular young lady who has come to me who said, I'd love to get work experience, and we thought we would be able to do it in Yap in Galway. Yap in Galway has subsequently closed. But I would love to get involved with that level of care. And understanding that when I finish my 4th year, which is doing an AIT at the moment, that I could actually apply for a job with TUSLA. But sometimes people like to know what that work experience is like, and it's not facilitated. And I totally understand everything to do with Garda vetting and everything. But these people would have it. They're 6 months from qualifying. Surely they're the people we should be putting the fishing line on and hooking them in. And that's not a commentary, but I think that's something that it should be a door that you should be able to open in facilitating that work experience, that mentoring programme, that academy. And that's not creating new spaces, but that's actually nearly holding on to what's there. Chair, I'm also wondering, since you took your role, have the people who work in TUSLA, and this is something that's come up in the past, have they the tools to do their job, to facilitate them in their caseloads, because we know that they're totally overburdened with caseloads, and the difference between people who work in TUSLA and caseloads and people who work at other organisations on similar sort of caseloads, they're twofold. But have the IT, have the way that they can actually have the mechanism when they leave a house, they can sit in the car, upload the information and move on, as opposed to coming back into the office from the paper back onto the IT system. What is the level of IT? Because I see the Affordable Childcare Scheme has taken us over 3 years because IT wasn't there. What is the IT for the people on the ground? And finally, Chair, you said there are a number of immediate priorities that I would like to progress. Would you care to share? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Rabbitte. Mr. Rabbitte, a number of observations and suggestions, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Can I say to Deputy Rabbitte, I've always wanted to say that, Chairman. I understand her frustration on the major issues she raised, and that times have changed, as she said. A lot of these issues that were concealed or hidden in the past are more frankly confronted now. I would ask her to understand, though, that the question of intervening in a family is a very fine balance. And, social workers by training, are very sensitive to walking that narrow line. I think perhaps that the best way of enhancing our mutual knowledge about a modus vivendi in this area would be the kind of engagement and political contact that both she and Deputy Sherlock has talked about. For example, last Friday we had a full day in the Midlands region in Mullingar, and the regional and local staff made detailed presentation to the board, which was immensely impressive, really. And which I think there is no reason that I can think of that it shouldn't be replicated to local deputies and senators and indeed councillors. I can't see any reason why it shouldn't be. I can see a difficulty in circumstances where a TD in their clinic is confronted, you know, by the parents concerning a particular case. It's very difficult to make a phone call to anybody, you know, Gardaí, Tusla, whomsoever, and to get the kind of, you know, and there isn't a great deal of point in giving people half information. It can only be misleading. But I think there is room to enhance that understanding that, that both deputies have talked about. Of course, Deputy Rabbitte is right about how times have changed. I mean, there were 57,000 referrals last year. I mean, if you stop somebody on the street and tell them that there were 57,000 referrals to Tusla last year, I think they would be amazed. When I started in the job, I asked the senior management team at my first meeting, was that good or was that bad? And to a person, they said, it's good, because it now means that these issues are being dealt with. It means that the existence of the agency is becoming known. Obviously, mandatory reporting has influence on it, and so on. But 40% increase since 24 is amazing, and it just shows you the workload that is there. Do staff, especially frontline staff, have the tools necessary to do the business? Well, I think, Deputy, what I would say to you on that is they're suddenly very much better than they were. For example, since last July, there is an IT system now in place, integrated across the entire system and across the entire country, that the response generally from staff inputting is that it's a huge advantage. And they have been provided with the devices. Perhaps I shouldn't make a blanket statement to that effect, but I know that certainly a very large number of them, and that's being dealt with all the time. The question of work experience, I mean, I wouldn't rule out any dimension in terms of addressing this shortage. You know, I mean, maybe there are straightforward admin staff talking about information technology and the tools of the trade. Admin people who could take some of the work, some of the burden off social workers and let them focus on the professional area that they need to. So I wouldn't rule out anything, but I am frustrated by pressure, which I fully understand, from different quarters on the agency to repair gaps in the service, which at the same time acknowledges that there's a shortage of social workers, not here, but across the Western world, but that somehow, notwithstanding that, we should be able to address the gaps. And we're not showing any urgency about doing that. I mean, if we were seized of a similar number of social workers per 1,000 population here, as for example in England, we would have a shortage of 1,500 social workers. Now, there isn't any point in me telling you or the agency preparing a workforce plan that says we need another 1,500 social workers simply because we're not going to get them. They aren't there. And in those circumstances, we have to look at creative solutions. And I wouldn't rule out any of them, but I think there is a great need for more urgency in how it's progressed. And it does, as Deputy Sherlock said at the outset, involve the Department of Education, for example, because in terms of that 215 turned out by the traditional universities, you know, we're competing with the HSE, for example. We're competing with the NGOs. We have circumstances where perhaps after doing 2 or 3 years in TUSLA, somebody wants to switch across or switch to an NGO and so on. So, I mean, you're always going to have this in and out, no matter what you do. You can certainly work at strategies for retention and making the job more attractive. And Deputy Rabbitte may well be right that there are possibilities there in terms of allowing social workers to focus on the professional job that is their priority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rabbitte, and you are most welcome. From my own perspective, like Deputy Sherlock, it's a bit strange to see you on that side of the committee room without your ministerial hat on, but you are most welcome. In relation to your offer for meeting with yourself and members of the executive team, that's welcome. We have done that before. It is probably something we should formalise and do on a more regular basis, because I do think it would be helpful to the committee in terms of its ability to perform its duties. One of the things that the deputies have touched on in advance of my own contribution is the lines of communication between the members in terms of our ability to perform our duties. And as you're probably aware, you may recollect, there was a statutory instrument, or a circular rather, issued by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in the last Dáil term, when instructing state agencies to set up an Oireachtas helpline or email service or whatever, so that members could liaise directly with an individual or a group of individuals within any given government department and or agency. And I think that's something that the agency perhaps needs to look at more closely in terms of its ability to communicate with us in a more timely manner. As Deputy Rabbitte pointed out, it is impossible for us to entertain a specific query in instances where we literally have to, an element of potluck as to whom we might get at the end of the phone, and you certainly won't get an individual who's actually dealing with a specific case within the agency. And while none of us are, that insofar as I'm aware at least, none of us are professionals in that field, we do have responsibilities, and there are certain aspects of our role which certainly do present us with difficult cases. I'm sure that you would be aware, Mr. Rabbitte, of the issues in Scouting Ireland at the moment, for instance, which have brought numerous individuals to the doors of members, no doubt, of this committee and members of the Oireachtas in general. Some of the cases are extremely difficult, both obviously for the individual in question, but also for the members of the Oireachtas who are attempting to support them. So it is something. It is. You've already commented on it, so that's more of a contribution rather than a question. But on the question side, the implementation of the strategic action plan, as recommended, or in response, I should say, to the HICWA investigation published last summer, threw up a number of difficulties, not just for TUSLA but for other agencies as well, in terms of the manner in which they dealt with the Maurice McCabe issue, and how they managed it effectively or otherwise. Are there aspects of your vast experience in these houses that you'd be able to bring to bear on TUSLA, and do you think that there's elements of that HICWA report, which I've no doubt you have read and perused, that should be implemented quicker, and or any other suggestions that emanate from it?
Thank you, Chairman. I should say, and I'll come back to it, I didn't deal with Deputy Rabbitte's question about priorities, and I'll come back to that. Yes, on the question of the Oireachtas helpline, I've been looking at this in the context of a different aspect of it, which is answers to parliamentary questions. And it's a very difficult area. The minister is very exercised by this as well, and I have had discussions with her about this issue. The report I have on it so far suggests to me that there are inadequate resources devoted to this area. You know, it's very important that the public have confidence in TUSLA. You know, that's something that, you know, the people I interact with in this job, you know, are professionals who are really dedicated to doing the job they're doing, but they don't engage with the outside world really very much, in my observation. And I think we do need to look at that, Chairman. You know, the business of answering parliamentary questions can be quite tricky, because there's a very restricted space between when the questions come to us and getting them back to the minister in time for her to do the preparation that she has to do to go into the House. And if the question is tricky, and let's be clear, there are a lot of deputies wouldn't put them in unless they are tricky. That in those circumstances it can be very difficult to source the information, to get in touch with the key person who is hands-on. But I think we can improve it, and I think we need to improve it. And I think your general point about the Oireachtas helpline and so on, we need to look at resources there. I think we need to look at the question of a spokesperson for the agency. You know, if you look at how many other bodies, they all have a name that all of you could come up with off the top of your heads that communicates not just to deputies but to the world at large, and who do radio and television bits about their particular responsibility. And I think we very badly need that person, because it would be a shame, Chairman, if some members of the public only knowledge of TUSLA came from the Maurice McCabe affair that you refer to. You know, there is an awful lot, there's an awful lot of good things happening, and we're not putting them out there. I mean, I agree with you, you know, what happened in the Maurice McCabe situation, egregious errors were made. And in my observation, I think TUSLA as an organisation was entirely too defensive about the way in which they responded to it. You know, I got a letter recently from the Charlton Tribunal clarifying the point that he did not indict the agency. He indicted the local management, the local people concerned with that Cavan Monaghan situation. And that clarification was welcome, and so on. But nonetheless, I would say that in my observation it unnecessarily convulsed the organisation. and you know, they were overly defensive about it. What happened shouldn't have happened under any set of circumstances, but we all make mistakes, and when it happened, people should have come out and simply told the truth. So, obviously, Chairman, the HICWA report that you refer to is central and front in terms of the tasks now facing us, and it is one of the priorities. To go back to Deputy Rabbitte's question, it is one of the priorities that I have, that we must continue insofar as resources permit to implement the recommendations of the HICWA report. Good progress, Chairman, is being made, and you know the Minister established an expert assurance group to ride shotgun, if you like, on the implementation of those recommendations. And there's regular engagement there. In fact, I'm meeting the chairman of the EAG on Monday. And, you know, progress is being made. Some areas, of course, you know, we're back to the question of resources and priorities. I mean, if any member of this committee was confronted with a situation where a choice has to be made about the children of today and their protection and welfare as compared to historic or retrospective cases, you know, of many years ago, I think most deputies would make the decision that we must firstly ensure that no child today is at risk without an effective and immediate response from TUSLA. And that is one conclusion of HICWA that is seldom headlined, which is that whatever the deficiencies highlighted, HICWA has always pointed to the fact that there is no child at risk for which there hasn't been an immediate response from TUSLA. And I think that's very important. I mean, HICWA is very important in terms of driving standards and so on. But of course, by definition, it's very often about a fault-finding exercise. And, you know, we should remember, as Deputy Rabbitte said in her opening remarks, it's not very many years ago when we attached a very low importance to this area. And suddenly there seems to be a universal expectation that we should be at leading edge on every aspect of it some 5 years after the agency was established. And I think, you know, there is a need for balance there. But those questions that you raised, Chairman, are part of my priority. Obviously, my first priority is to put in place a chief executive. The post, I am advised, any confidentiality surrounding it, I don't see why there should be, is being advertised on the 8th of March. And I mean, that's a very important appointment for obvious reasons. Staff retention and staff recruitment is a further priority. Continuing to implement the HICWA recommendations is a third. The matter I talked about improving communications to the public and to the political environment is another. Addressing unallocated cases is a fifth or sixth. I don't mean in priority. These are all matters that have to be progressed in sync. On that question of unallocated cases, you know, I've been reassured I've been in Galway meeting the local management. As I said, I was in Mullingar last Friday, and I've been in other areas where it's comforting to be advised that there aren't cases piling up somewhere in a cupboard or a filing cabinet unattended to. Unallocated cases does not mean that they haven't been screened, and that if there is any immediate risk to a child, then that is attended to. And I think that's important, because I think people have the impression that if it's an unallocated case, it is not getting attention at all, and that it might be substantive and urgent. And in that regard, Deputy Rabbitte's point about whether staff have the tools of the trade to do the job, I mean, until last July, it was a paper-based system. And, you know, that's a hugely significant point in the world we live in. And it accounts for some of the criticisms of HICWA about discrepancies in practice or inconsistencies in practice between different parts of the country and so on. But that IT system, I'm advised, is working very well and is also greeted with positivity by the staff.
Just as a follow-up, and you touched upon it yourself in terms of your suggestion, a sort of spokesperson for the agency. You know, the inherent nature of the work that is completed by the agency, unfortunately, tends to be portrayed in the media as only being negative stories. There's never really positive ones, and yet there are so many services that the agency provide that I think the general public really does need to hear about on a more regular basis. So, you know, in those priorities that you've listed, I do think in terms of the agency's communication with the general public in terms of the family supports and resources that are available through it should become more central to the message that is being put out there by the agency. So that's something that you've touched upon. Therefore, it's clearly something you're considering. So I won't dwell upon it other than to.
I would just say quickly on that, Chairman, that at the first board meeting I had, the board were immensely supportive of that, and I kind of intended to plough ahead. And then, on mature reflection, I felt that maybe it would be more prudent to wait until a chief executive is in place, because I don't think the recruitment of a spokesperson should be seen to function for the chairman. I think it should be for the agency, and the chief executive has the responsibility there and so on. But I do agree with you. I think it's a position that.
But there's so many agencies that I can think of,
yes,
as you rightly said, off the top of my head, where there is an individual whom I can phone, get a response almost instantly.
Indeed.
You know, it may not be in depth, but it will be, enough to keep a constituent in a holding pattern if it is a non-important or non-significant matter. But to be able to speak to somebody and get a referral through to an individual within the agency who can make a significant difference in the life of a child or their family.
I understand that.
That would be imperative for me. Well, thank you for that. I'll now ask Deputy Mitchell and then Deputy Neville.
Yeah, just briefly, just a few points. I really want to wish you all the best, Mr. Rabbitte, in your new role. And I had questions to come in and ask you, but you answered what I was going to say. But I just want to touch back base on the promotion of TUSLA. I really believe that this is vital work. On a personal capacity, I'm well aware of the fantastic work TUSLA is doing across all communities in this state with supporting families and supporting young children. And I recall speaking to the previous CEO before and saying to him, this is something that we need to get out there, because these are the positive, good stories and the good work, happening in communities. So I'd really, really wish you the very best with that, and hopefully that's something that comes on board, because I really do believe it's vital, because there's families out there who aren't even aware that these services exist. So I'd really, really would love to see that being rolled out across communities. And I'm really happy to hear you also talking about the retention of social workers, because I know it is a problem, and it's not only a problem for you, the agency itself, it's also a problem for the children, because we have got children who have developed relationships, and really good relationships with social workers that were built on, and are built on trust, and then when social workers are moving on, there's a new social workers who are building that trust again. So I welcome the fact there, the way you're talking about social work, probably administrative staff. I think that's vital, because I think we need our social workers on the ground. We need our social workers working with children, and we need them working with families. And we don't want to see them having to go back to offices and bogged down with, as you say, administrative work. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's a possibility that we could look at probably an internal operational review into actually that sort of work being carried out in TUSLA itself?
Thank you very much, Deputy. I think the short answer now to the point you make about promotion and explaining TUSLA to the public, I think there's general agreement on that. As I say, the board were supportive of the idea. I raised it at the first meeting I had with the Minister, and she certainly thinks that it's a very good idea, that the public should know and have confidence in the organisation, and that we should put out there some of the good work that you refer to. I mean, having said what I've said about HICWA, and about HICWA being necessary in terms of somebody must invigilate standards and best practice and so on, and some of the HICWA stuff that I have seen is very high quality in terms of rigour and so on. But by definition, it's a fault-finding exercise. And when the report comes out, you will find laid out very simply what the problems are. The deficiencies, they will be set out, the non-compliance, and it's very easy material for promotion, But there's rarely a pat on the head or an acknowledgement for the very many good things that are going on at the same time. And I think I agree with you that should be done. I would like to think, Deputy, unless you have a particular point on it, I would like to think, Deputy Mitchell, that that kind of internal review is going on all of the time. I mean, I have said to the board that in my experience, I have never seen a more prescriptive piece of legislation than the statute that establishes TUSLA. And that really reflects the circumstances in which it was born and some of the high-profile material that came into the public domain. But it is hugely prescriptive. And, piled on top of that are several mechanisms of oversight. We have been discussing, for example, the expert advisory group. It seems to me on balance that that's been helpful, because, it has put a particular focus on that particular area, and it has driven, the agency to respond and so on. But the scale of oversight, between oversight agreements with the department, protocols on this, memorandums of understanding on that, expert advisory group, HICWA, performance statements, interaction with the department, regular meetings with the Minister, structured meetings with the Minister, meeting the board, appearances before the Oireachtas committee. Any one of these could be very good on their own, but sometimes I wonder whether more is less, and whether the senior management can afford to apply themselves to the actual job they should be doing. Because you can't relegate the preparation of reports for the department or the Minister or the Oireachtas committee or whomsoever to junior staff. It has to be done by the senior staff. And, you know, I think we should be careful that we don't take away from what is their primary duty, and that is to drive change management and implement the matters that are now in the public domain. You know, it's not that we don't know what needs to be done better, but it is having the time to cause it to happen. Because culture is a very difficult thing to tackle in any organisation, and we have an inherited culture. And, you know, there probably are people who say, we've been doing this for 25 years and we know how it should be done, and, you know, we don't care how it's done in some other region or whatever. There is a culture there, and times have changed, as Deputy Rabbitte said. Times have changed, and you know, we need to confront that, and only senior management can drive that change programme.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rabbitte and Deputy Mitchell. Deputy Neville, please.
Yeah, thank you, Cahill. And sorry for being late. I was tied up with something else. Just a couple of quick questions, Mr. Rabbitte. And I agree with you there in relation to that change and cultural change. It takes years to build culture, and you can break it in a day. You know, so it is, as in you're building the culture of a company, and you can just go like that. That's not define the fact of what you've mentioned in trying to steer it the other way as well, but in breaking that good culture, or to build up that good culture again. The other thing I want to mention is that, look, from us from the outside in relation to organisations such as TUSLA and what was highlighted there, and I have come across it. I'm in the mental health committee as well, and I've come across it in the mental health committee. And obviously I've worked in this area, in the area of the IT systems and IT and electronic communication, and how that fosters accountability, because with electronic communication there's always someone at the other end and they can be identified. And I think that's where a lot of, well, I'll speak for myself personally, where I was a bit surprised and quite shocked that there wasn't that electronic communication there. And that has been highlighted on the mental health side as well, and on the workings of public service organisations. So, you know, there's correlations there in which catch-up, as you say, needs to be played. But I think from myself coming from the outside, I can't understand why that catch-up didn't happen earlier. I don't want to go back over all ground, but I think that's why there was a lot of surprise and a lot of shock that there wasn't that type of electronic communication. And my question then is, obviously, where are we in relation to electronic communication and change management, as you said yourself, and the implementation of new systems, particularly mobile systems, maybe for social workers that free up their work so they're allowed to be front of house. Also the systems that will actually help the business side or the business function of TUSLA, so it'll free up senior management's time. Where are we at in that change management process? Are we 50% there? Are we 70% there? Finally, where are we in relation to an electronic integration with the Gardaí? Obviously, some of the experiences highlighted was a breakdown in communication or mismanagement of communication, or I want to choose my words carefully here, yeah, as I said, mismanagement of communication between both sectors, that electronic communication wasn't there, so you have the record. You know, even if it's basic emails, I did ask your predecessor in relation to email consultation, that is an electronic form of communication as opposed to paper communication. Finally, as I mentioned the last day, I would want to put on the record in relation to social workers and people who work on the front end of TUSLA, the good work that they do, and that message to go out. I think sometimes, as you say, we can really harp on, and it's our job too to try and identify and overturn the stones to find out where we can actually improve the system. But if that message actually supersedes what the system is there in the first place to do, which is actually to provide protection, I think it's imperative on us that we actually get that message out there as well into the public domain. So if you could answer my question around the change management, it'd be fantastic, and thank you for coming in.
Thanks very much, Deputy Neville. I think your last point there about the work that social workers do is very important, because I think some of us would find it very difficult to do that job week in, week out. And people do suffer from burnout and so on. And I certainly don't belong to the Jose Mourinho School of Management, where I criticise my own players. I don't think that's a good policy. And I think there's a lot to praise in it. I suppose I should be reluctant, Deputy Neville, to answer your question about what percentage is it? Is it 70% or more now in terms of social workers having the mobility and wherewithal to do their jobs without reliance on the old system?
I suppose I might make it, I might make it easier for you. You're speaking about, there's obviously change management happening.
Yes.
And that change management has a timeline. Is it over 2 years or 4 years or 3 years, whatever, like happens in any major organisation?
Yes.
And I just want to ascertain where you are in the timeline in relation to change management as opposed to the specifics.
I think we're about halfway there, because it's important to start to answer your question to remind ourselves that the agency came into being at the nadir of our fortunes economically. And I mean, you're in a majority. People throw their hands up in amazement that we were a paper-based system up until quite recently. But the facts of the matter are insufficient monies were allocated during the period of foundation of the agency, for all of the reasons that we know. Now, fortunately, things have changed. Economic recovery has been faster than anybody suggested at the time. Whether it is even is a political question that doesn't concern us here. But the Minister has found significant additional resources, especially in the last 2 years. And people expert in the area assure me that the NCCIS system is working very well. And they place a lot of value on the fact that it's embraced by the staff, by frontline staff. Now, there may be some exceptions to that I'm not being told about, I don't know. But generally speaking, people see it as a positive. And certainly is in terms of wasting time in the old system, it offers great possibilities there. As well as setting the foundation of the agency, you know, in the economic circumstances of 2014, I think we also have to look back and say that in the very short time, we've had 3 chief executives, you know, and I think, you know, whoever is the chief executive confirmed in post, hopefully in the next couple of months, that might be ambitious. The driving of the change management program has to be his priority. You know, it's the expertise and professionalism is there in terms of the core business. The role of the chief executive has to be as a chief executive and manager, and driving that will be his or her priority. I can't give the committee any assessment. We have been talking to PASS and as I say, the post will be advertised on March 8. I can't give the committee any kind of assessment about how quickly and how successful that will be. You know,
Is remuneration an issue there? Given the competitive market that we're in at present, is the remuneration issue potentially a stumbling block?
I think it is. I think it is. You know, you're talking about an organisation with 4,000 employees, 500 agency staff, with a very precise statutory obligation to discharge in a very complex and sensitive business. And, you know, would every chief executive out there apply for the job at the salary and duration? I must say the duration concerns me as well. I have made representations to the Minister on both the salary and the duration. I mean, if you were looking for somebody outside of the jurisdiction, would you transfer in present-day housing circumstances and others, would you transfer for a 5-year term? I can't see any reason why, you know, there are always reasons why deeper will give you for not changing the salary, and that's the natural impulse of deeper for obvious reasons.
Public expenditure and reform.
Yes, but I mean, you know, why shouldn't the 7-year term, for example, that is the norm in government departments, why shouldn't that apply to this kind of appointment? I think there's a strong argument for it being a 7-year term. I mean, I don't know this, Chairman, for a fact, but I think didn't they have to go back a second time in terms of seeking a chief executive of the HSE? And I think changes have been made in the conditions. I don't know that for a fact, but I think it might be the case. And, you know, I would rather see us putting our best foot forward in the first attempt to recruit someone, rather than failing and having to come back in 3 months and start all over again.
Just a very final issue, and I don't expect a substantive answer at this stage. I just wanted to, you know, just put on the record the fact that this committee had been dealing with matters in Scouting Ireland, and that there is a helpline which has been set up now. There are over 200 cases, possibly well in excess of that, that have been reported in the Irish Times. And I suppose my concern is that there would be, if we're talking about the relationship between the Oireachtas and TUSLA, that there would be some sense of an understanding of the dynamic that exists between TUSLA and Scouting Ireland in respect of the handling of those cases at present. Because if the number of cases has gone north of 200 and there is an internal Scouting Ireland helpline on that, you know, I just would wish maybe to return to this at some point in the future, perhaps when the Chief Executive is appointed, so as to inform ourselves of the dynamic that exists in terms of handling those cases. And I don't even expect a response to that point at this juncture, but just to put it on the record.
Thank you, Deputy. And I took a note earlier when the Chairman raised the same point, and I certainly will bring that back to the management, because I've been reading, like you, what is in the public domain, and obviously it's a major issue.
Yeah, no, and a worthy intervention, Deputy Sherlock, because it is something that obviously affects 50,000 members ultimately, and it is important for us as a committee to be able to stand over a variety of different pieces of information that come to us from a variety of sources. Well, on behalf of the members then, Mr. Rabbitte, I wish you all the very best with your new role. Thank you very much for coming in before us, the meeting of the committee is adjourned until Wednesday, the 13th of March at 9:30 at 10 a.m. in fact, when the committee will meet with the Irish Foster Carers Association and the Irish Association of Social Workers to discuss recruitment and retention of social workers. Members are reminded that the Select Committee will meet next Wednesday, the 6th of March at 4:30 to discuss the revised estimates 2019 Vote 40 Children and Youth Affairs with the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the committee.